What if I told you that much of what we call history is really a collection of polished half-truths and glorified bedtime stories? Think about the things we have been told since childhood: that the Great Wall of China is visible from the moon, that medieval people believed the earth was flat, or that brave knights never bathed. These stories sound epic, dramatic, even poetic, but most of them are just beautiful lies that survived because they were easy to remember and too entertaining to question. Today, we are diving into a world where truth bends under the weight of storytelling. History is not just a timeline. It is a tug-of-war between fact and myth. For centuries, people have reshaped events to make them inspiring, profitable, or politically convenient. A king might exaggerate a victory to look divine. A company might invent a tradition to sell a product. A nation might glorify its past to build pride. And before you know it, the story becomes fact. But here's the twist. The real history hiding underneath is often far more fascinating than the myth itself. When you discover that the unsinkable Titanic was never officially called unsinkable, or that the mysterious Illuminati was more like a short-lived philosophy club than a shadowy empire, it makes you see human nature in a new light. We crave meaning, we crave heroes and villains, and we will twist reality just a little if it makes the world feel like a story worth telling. So in today's video, we are pulling back the curtain on history's greatest illusions, the 33 famous facts that millions still believe. These myths have shaped how we think about science, war, culture, and even love itself. Some were born from innocent misunderstandings, others from deliberate manipulation, but all of them remind us of one crucial truth. The past is not just what happened, it is what people chose to remember. Grab your curiosity and maybe a notebook, because by the end of this journey, you might start to wonder how many other truths around us are really just stories that got out of hand. Welcome to the Great Unlearning, where we separate history from fiction, one myth at a time. Let us begin with some of the world's most famous facts, the ones repeated so often they sound unquestionable. These are the legends that made their way into classrooms, tourist guides, and documentaries. Yet, behind their popularity lies a quiet truth. Most of them are either exaggerated, misunderstood, or completely false. Take the Great Wall of China, for example. For decades, we have heard it is the only man-made object visible from the moon. It is a poetic image, humanity's creation, stretching so vast that even astronauts could see it from space. But astronauts themselves have repeatedly said the opposite. You can't see it with the naked eye, not even from low Earth orbit. The wall is long, yes, but it is too narrow and blends too perfectly with its surroundings. The myth began centuries before space travel existed, and once it entered textbooks, it never left. Or the New York City sewer alligators, a story that is both creepy and hilarious. According to urban folklore, wealthy families once bought baby alligators as exotic pets. When they grew too large, the owners supposedly flushed them down the toilet, and the reptiles survived in the dark tunnels beneath Manhattan, growing into pale, monstrous creatures. It is a perfect horror story, except not one piece of evidence supports it. No bones, no sightings, no records from sanitation workers. It is urban fantasy at its best, absurd but unforgettable. Then there is the Illuminati, perhaps the ultimate conspiracy myth. The real Bavarian Illuminati was a small intellectual club in the 18th century, a group of philosophers promoting reason and enlightenment ideals. It lasted about a decade before being shut down. Yet somehow, That little club evolved into the modern idea of a world-controlling shadow government. Why? Because the human mind loves big patterns. It is comforting to think someone, somewhere, is secretly in control of the chaos. These myths show a pattern. They survive not because they are true, but because they are satisfying. They make the world seem grander, stranger, more meaningful. Reality is often subtle and boring, but myths sparkle. They turn ordinary walls, reptiles, and defunct clubs into legendary symbols. And that is why, even today, we keep repeating them, not because we know they are real, but because we want them to be. Science, for all its precision and evidence, has its own collection of tall tales. Over time, stories of discovery become polished, dramatized, and trimmed into neat little fables, the kind that fit perfectly into a schoolbook paragraph or a movie scene. But real science is rarely that cinematic. It is messy, uncertain, and filled with long nights of doubt and error. Take Isaac Newton's apple. Everyone knows the story. He sat under a tree, an apple fell on his head, and bam, gravity was born. It is such a neat mental image that we never question it. But in truth, Newton himself only described watching an apple fall, not being hit by one. The bonk on the head version was a later invention, added by storytellers who thought a little slapstick would make the moment more memorable. The reality is quieter but more profound, a moment of observation, not comedy. Newton did not discover gravity in a second of pain, but through years of reflection and calculation. Or, consider the flat earth myth about the Middle Ages. It is often said that people in medieval Europe thought the earth was flat until brave Christopher Columbus proved it was round. But historians know that educated people of that era already accepted a spherical earth, an idea dating back to the ancient Greeks. Columbus's critics did not doubt the planet's shape. They doubted his math, which badly underestimated its size. The myth of the flat earth was later invented in the 19th century to paint the past as ignorant and Columbus as a lone genius fighting superstition. Then there is the Mozart effect, a modern myth with classical music and scientific misinterpretation. A small 1,993 study showed college students performed slightly better on spatial reasoning tests after listening to Mozart for 10 minutes. That is, it's a tiny, temporary improvement. But media headlines turned it into Mozart makes you smarter, sparking a global craze of parents playing symphonies for babies. It became a billion-dollar industry built on a misunderstanding. These stories reveal how even science, a field rooted in skepticism, is not immune to storytelling. We simplify discovery into aha moments because we crave drama. We want our geniuses to be hit by apples, not haunted by years of equations. But real discovery is slower, quieter, and often less magical, yet far more human. If there is one force as powerful as myth-making itself, it is marketing. Some of the most persistent lies in history were not created by kings or priests. They were written by advertisers, political spin doctors, or propaganda writers who understood how stories can sell ideas better than any fact ever could. Take diamonds, for example. Today, we treat them as symbols of eternal love, rare treasures meant to seal engagements and prove devotion. But that entire idea was manufactured. In the 20th century, the diamond company De Beers built a monopoly on the global supply, hoarded stones to control the market, and then launched one of the most successful ad campaigns in history. Their slogan, "A diamond is forever," did not just sell jewelry, it sold an illusion of love, status, and permanence. Before that, diamond engagement rings were far from a universal tradition. The ad did not just change shopping habits, it rewrote culture. Or look at the Titanic, remembered as the unsinkable ship. That label was not part of the White Star Line's official marketing. It was mostly a media invention. The company described the ship as practically unsinkable, but journalists dropped the practically for dramatic effect. Unsinkable ship sinks made a perfect headline. Ironic, emotional, tragic. The phrase spread faster than any correction could ever catch it. It is a reminder that the press, too, can turn half-truths into history with just one catchy phrase. And it is not just products or disasters propaganda does it too. The short essay, A Message to Garcia, written in 1899, became a corporate and military training tool for over a century. It told the story of a soldier who completed an impossible mission without asking questions, a model of obedience and efficiency. The story's heroic core, entirely fabricated, but it was repeated in boardrooms and boot camps as a parable of loyalty, shaping generations of workers and soldiers. These examples show how power uses narrative to influence behavior. Myths that flatter, simplify, or inspire loyalty spread faster than facts. Whether it is a sparkling gem, a doomed ship, or a soldier's blind devotion, every great marketing myth hides the same truth. When emotion meets repetition, belief becomes brand, and fiction becomes history. When we picture the ancient world, or the Middle Ages, we often imagine them through the fog of legend, gleaming marble statues, dirty peasants, torture chambers, and plague-ridden streets. But these images are more Hollywood fantasy than historical truth. Centuries of misunderstanding, artistic bias, and selective storytelling have twisted how we see the past. Let us start with ancient Greece and Rome. We often think of their statues as pure white marble, elegant, timeless, and minimal. But in reality, those statues were once painted in bright, even garish colors, vivid reds, greens, blues, and golds. Over thousands of years, the paint faded, leaving bare stone behind. When Renaissance artists rediscovered them, they assumed the whiteness was intentional, birthing the false idea that classical beauty meant pure marble. That aesthetic bias would go on to shape Western art for centuries, even linking whiteness with perfection and civilization. A simple misunderstanding became an entire ideology. Then there is the Iron Maiden, that infamous human-shaped torture device lined with spikes. It appears in every medieval horror museum and heavy metal album cover, but it never existed in the Middle Ages. It was a theatrical invention from the 18th or 19th century, created as a macabre curiosity for tourists. The real medieval tortures were already brutal enough. They did not need this nightmare coffin. Yet the Iron Maiden's image stuck because it looked terrifying and terror sells. And what about the dirty, unwashed Middle Ages? We have been taught that people never bathed and lived in filth. While hygiene standards were not modern, medieval Europeans were not crawling with grime either. Many towns had public bathhouses. People washed their hands and faces daily, and soap made from animal fat and ash was common. The myth of total filth came later, exaggerated by Enlightenment writers and Victorian historians eager to portray the Middle Ages as backward and uncivilized, a convenient contrast to their own age of progress. These examples remind us that much of what we see when imagining the past was colored by later generations' tastes and prejudices. The ancients were more colorful, the medievals more civilized, and the tortures more theatrical than real. In short, history's grime and glory were painted and repainted by those who came after. History loves its heroes and villains, but not their complexity. Over time, real people are reduced to symbols, stripped of nuance until they fit neatly into a single line of a textbook or a movie poster. The result? Legends that feel satisfying, but often bear little resemblance to the messy truth. Take Cleopatra, for instance. In popular imagination, she is the ultimate femme fatale, a seductress who brought mighty Roman generals to their knees with her beauty. But Cleopatra was not Egyptian at all. She was part of the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great. Historical evidence suggests she was not conventionally beautiful either. Coins from her reign show a sharp, intelligent face, not a movie star look. Her real power was her mind. She spoke several languages, understood politics like chess, and played Rome's strongest men against each other with brilliance. Her legend was later reshaped by Roman propaganda and Hollywood glamour into a tale of lust, not leadership. Or think of Emperor Nero, eternally condemned by the phrase "Nero fiddled while Rome burned." The problem? The fiddle did not even exist in his time. Contemporary accounts place him miles away when the fire began, and they describe him returning to Rome to organize relief efforts. He opened his palaces to the homeless and paid for food distribution. But later historians, influenced by political bias, turned him into a villain who played music while his people suffered. Once again, the lie was more dramatic, and drama always wins. Then there is the Japanese Banzai charge of World War II. Western media painted it as blind fanaticism, soldiers rushing suicidally into gunfire out of madness or religious zeal. In truth, these charges were last resort tactics made in hopeless situations when supplies were gone, and surrender meant execution. They were desperate acts of survival and honor, not insanity. These cases show how easily nuance disappears once history meets storytelling. A queen becomes a seductress. A flawed emperor becomes a monster. A military maneuver becomes madness. Simplification makes history digestible, but it also makes it deceptive. The real people behind these myths were neither saints nor demons. They were human, and that is what makes their stories truly worth telling. War has always been fertile ground for myth-making. In times of conflict, people crave stories of courage and sacrifice tales that turn chaos into meaning. But when history gets rewritten for pride or propaganda, reality is often lost beneath the legend. One of the most famous examples is the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. We have all heard the version where a tiny band of fearless warriors held off a 1,000,000-man Persian army, fighting to their last breath. It is cinematic, inspiring, and oversimplified. In truth, there were around 7,000 Greek soldiers from various city-states standing beside the Spartans. The 300 became famous only because they were the elite corps, and because 7,000 Greeks fought bravely just does not sound as heroic in a movie trailer. The myth endured because it celebrated the idea of noble sacrifice, a theme every culture loves to claim as its own. Then there is the Trojan horse, perhaps the most famous military trick of all time, a massive wooden horse wheeled into the city, hiding Greek soldiers inside. But historians believe it was likely metaphorical. The horse could have been a siege engine, or even a poetic symbol for an earthquake. Poseidon, god of horses, was also god of quakes. Still, the story of a literal wooden horse smuggling soldiers into Troy was simply too good to resist. It became legend because a story of deception and downfall resonates more than a description of siege mechanics. And consider dueling, those dramatic scenes of honor where one man throws down a glove, the other picks it up, and pistols are drawn at dawn. In reality, duels were rarely so theatrical. By the 18th and 19th centuries, they were formal, bureaucratic events, polite letters were exchanged, mediators negotiated terms, and most disputes were settled before shots were fired. The glove-throwing ritual was mostly symbolic, exaggerated later by literature and cinema to heighten tension. In each of these examples, the truth is quieter, less glamorous but perhaps more revealing. Real heroism is not about perfect endings or clean morality. It is about fear, failure, strategy, and endurance. Yet we prefer the myth because it gives us something simpler to believe in, a story where bravery always wins and where history itself feels like a grand performance. If myths once spread through campfires and scriptures, today they travel through movies, novels, and pop culture. Modern storytellers have become the new historians, and they have done just as much reshaping of the truth as the scribes and poets of the past. Take Sherlock Holmes, the brilliant detective whose name is practically a synonym for logic. Everyone knows his catchphrase, "Elementary, my dear Watson." It is quoted in every parody, printed on mugs, and even used as a shorthand for smug intelligence. But here's the twist. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle never wrote that line. Not once. Holmes says "elementary," and he says "my dear Watson," but never together. The famous phrase was born decades later in stage adaptations and early films, which stitched the two lines together for effect. Audiences loved it so much that it became canon, retroactively rewriting the original. The invention became the truth. The same thing happened with Disney's White Wilderness documentary in 1958, which staged the infamous lemming suicide scene. The filmmakers literally pushed lemmings off a cliff to dramatize a myth about mass animal self-destruction, and audiences believed it. The result was tragic, both ethically and scientifically, but it demonstrates how visual media can overwrite reality in people's minds. And who could forget the Hollywood Western dusty main streets, clock towers, and duels at noon? These movies gave us the image of the lone white cowboy as America's ultimate hero, moral, rugged, and unshakable. But the real Old West was far more diverse and far less glamorous. Up to a quarter of cowboys were black, and many more were Mexican vaqueros, whose traditions defined cowboy culture, the hats, lassos, and riding techniques. But that truth did not fit Hollywood's narrative, so it was quietly erased. Pop culture does not just entertain, it edits. Once a story appears on a big screen or in a best-selling book, it can overwrite centuries of nuance. People remember the performance, not the fact. The irony is that every generation accuses the previous one of distorting history while doing the exact same thing in new forms. Whether it is film reels or social media clips, we keep remixing the past until it feels just right, even if it is completely wrong. Sometimes, myths do not just survive, they are needed. Nations, religions, and cultures all use stories to define who they are, to build unity, and to make their past sound noble or meaningful. In that process, nuance becomes the first casualty. Facts are trimmed, inconvenient truths are erased, and legends rise in their place not because they are true, but because they feel true. Take William Tell, Switzerland's folk hero. According to legend, he was forced by a tyrant to shoot an apple off his son's head with a crossbow, and after succeeding, he sparked a rebellion that gave birth to Swiss independence. It is a perfect national myth, courage, defiance, and family loyalty all in one. The only problem, there is no evidence he ever existed. The same story appears in older Nordic and Germanic folklore long before it was Swiss. But people embraced it because it gave their nation a heroic origin story, one that embodied freedom and resistance. Or consider the tale of Ponce de Leon and the Fountain of Youth. We have been told he roamed Florida, searching for magical waters that could restore eternal life. It is a romantic image of human vanity and hope, except he never wrote or said anything about such a quest. The legend was attached to him decades later by rival historians who wanted to mock him as a gullible fool. What began as satire became fact, retold endlessly in books and classrooms. Then there is the modern pseudo-history of the Priory of Sion, popularized by the Da Vinci Code. The book portrayed it as a centuries-old secret society guarding Jesus' bloodline. In truth, the entire organization was invented in 1956 by a Frenchman named Pierre Plantard, who forged documents to claim royal ancestry. Yet, after the novel's release, millions believed it had ancient roots. The myth grew stronger than the evidence. These stories remind us that myths are not always mistakes, they are mirrors. They show what people want to believe about themselves, that their ancestors were brave, their nation chosen, their faith mysterious. Myths simplify identity into something emotionally powerful and easy to remember. The danger is when we forget that they are stories and start treating them as proof. Because once belief becomes heritage, even the truth has trouble breaking through. After exploring so many of these myths, from diamond marketing to ancient statues, from Newton's apple to Hollywood cowboys, one truth becomes crystal clear. The real danger is not just in being lied to, but in never questioning the stories that comfort us. Myths survive not because people are foolish, but because people are human. We love stories that make the world simpler, safer, or more dramatic. But if we want to truly understand history and ourselves, we need to practice informed skepticism. That does not mean doubting everything. It means learning to ask the right questions. When you hear a fact that feels too perfect, too cinematic, or too emotionally satisfying, pause for a second. Who told it first? Who benefits from it? Is there a source, or just a story passed down through repetition? The line between history and myth often is not drawn by evidence, but by emotion. And the more emotionally powerful a tale is, the more carefully it needs to be examined. Think of it like archaeology. Every story has layers. The shiny version on top is usually what people remember. But the deeper you dig, the closer you get to truth. A truth that is rarely neat or heroic, but far more human. Sometimes you will find that a myth began as propaganda. Other times, it was just a misunderstanding that no one ever bothered to correct. Either way, the act of questioning does not destroy history, it restores it. And here's the most beautiful part. When you strip away the lies, the real stories underneath are often even more fascinating. The fact that the Great Wall can't be seen from space does not make it less amazing. It reminds us how vast the Earth really is. Knowing that Cleopatra's power came from intellect, not beauty, makes her legacy stronger. Real history does not need exaggeration to inspire awe. Truth is already dramatic enough. So as we close this journey through the 33 biggest lies in history, remember, knowledge is not about collecting facts. It is about learning to see through them. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop digging. Because sometimes, the greatest discoveries are not in what history tells us, but in what it hides. So, What do all these stories really tell us? That history, the way it is taught, remembered, and retold, is not a static record of facts. It is a living, breathing story shaped by power, pride, creativity, and sometimes pure imagination. Every generation edits it a little more, polishing rough edges, inventing heroes, or turning small truths into grand legends. And yet, that is what makes history both fragile and beautiful. It is not carved in stone, it is written in ink that the future can still rewrite. If you think about it, every myth we have talked about today has one thing in common. It tells us more about the people who created it than about the event itself. The myth of the Great Wall shows humanity's longing for greatness. The legend of Cleopatra reveals our obsession with beauty and power. The story of William Tell speaks to the universal desire for freedom. Even the fabricated "a diamond is forever" campaign reminds us how easily love, pride, and aspiration can be packaged into a product. Behind every historical lie is a very real human truth, a need to believe in something larger than ourselves. But here's the good news. Once we see that, we are no longer trapped by it. We can still appreciate myths as stories while recognizing their limits. We can admire the courage of the 300 Spartans while acknowledging the thousands who fought beside them. We can love the mystery of the Trojan horse while accepting it might never have existed. Truth and imagination do not have to be enemies. They just need to be labeled honestly. And that is why being curious matters. Curiosity is what keeps history alive, not as a dusty archive, but as a conversation. Every time you question, every time you fact check, every time you ask, wait, is that really true? You are doing the work of a historian. You are rescuing truth from the grip of legend. So as we end today's story, here's your challenge. Do not just remember the 33 myths we debunked. Remember the habit of asking, because somewhere between the lies and the facts, you will find something far more powerful than either understanding. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, and I will see you in the next journey through history's hidden corners, where truth is stranger and sometimes kinder than the myths we have been told.